Jack McCoy. I first knew Jack when he was a kid. Jack had an interesting life. He was racing cars when he was just a teenager, just a kid. And his mom and dad didn't know that he was racing cars. And he had a neighbor. They lived out Crow's Landing Road somewhere. And he had a neighbor with he fixed this car up over in at this guy's garage. Jack, matter of fact, said once, he says, all I really wanted in life is to own a record yard so that I could have parts to fix my car with. And he proceeded to race, and he won a track championship at 99 Speedway, which was in Modesto at that time. And he was, I'm not sure how old he was in his teens still, and he raced under the name of Tombstone Smith. And he won this championship, and his parents didn't know that he was even racing. That's kinda, Jack was younger than me. He was in school at different times, always had hot rod cars, and always did stuff, whatever it might be. He did one thing I thought was really cool. He started, his dad owned a recapping McCoy tire, and they recap tires. And he figured out how to get a soft rubber and recap these race tires, and he started selling them. And of course, he made his car go faster than other people, but he started selling these race tires all over the place, and he made money with it. He did that for about 10 years. The one car over here, the little bullet car we called, I found the thing, and then Chuck Billington and Jack both bought into it, and we raced that for about 5-6 years. We set a whole bunch of records with it. Has a Ford flathead in it, and we worked real hard on it. Spent a bunch of money. First year at Bonneville, we get there with the car and all that stuff, and we're kind of late. We go to check in the hotel, which we had reservations, and the hotel got it screwed up, and we couldn't get those people to give us a room. And Jack went right to the counter, and he stood there, and he says, I got reservations, and this is the way it's going to be, and I'm not moving from this counter till you give me a room. And I think we got 2 rooms, because when we'd go to the races, we'd have a whole pit crew, just a bunch of people. First time at Bonneville, we set a record, overhauled it, and then we had to do a backup run in the morning, and I think we got that little bullet car up to 210, and then we got it a little bit faster. It has a Ford flathead in it.
Well, I'm Bobby Gaines. I'm from the East. Came to California in 1949. Got into the automotive business with my father. He had a service station, a garage, and along the way we needed supplies for the service station, and we bought tires from McCoy Tire. Jack was the salesperson. He came around and made contacts weekly or whatever our needs were. Anyway, that's how I got to know Jack McCoy and his father, John, his mother, her name, a brother and sister, and all of their workers that they had. It was a good deal. Along the way, I got into more of a performance line, working in my dad's shop, working on hot rods, building hot rods. Got to know a person called Charlie Bell. He and Jack McCoy were, he built engines for Jack. Were very successful. From the modifieds, they're up to the NASCAR on the West Coast. Racing on the West Coast did very well. I was included in helping build on the cars, mainly in the engines, because of Charlie's, I learned quite a bit from Charlie Bell. We had a lot of success saw a lot of country. From up north in Oregon down to Riverside numerous times. California Speedway down south. All the tracks that they ran here in California, I don't know all of them at this time. We'd go up north, had a lot of success. Ran Stockton. Jack dominated the racing at Stockton, even in his early days. I think he had a run of 12 to 15 in a row at Stockton, and they were paying a fund to who could beat him. Anyway, Jack just he did good, and that was with a Chrysler Flathead 6 that was built by Charlie. And I was part of that too. We pit crewed and went all over. Learned a lot about life, responsibility. Really enjoyed it. Jack and I would take, when we would go to Riverside, Jack wasn't allowed to drive the tow car, the tow truck, the hauler, so he would go down late in his, I rode down with him 2 or 3 times down to Riverside, and then we rode home also. We had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. He was real proud. Yeah, that began in like '66. They bought, they bought a '60, I think a car from back east, a Nichols car. It was a Dodge, like a Cornet, and a postcard, 2-door postcard. And they bought numerous cars just to get new cars, just to get the Hemi engine, and so we can rebuild those, or we'll build them for the racing. We ran the wedges first, the 426 maxi wedges, and made a lot of power. Had a lot of success there. Jack was a very talented guy. He could run just as hard as he needed to. Charlie was, they were all good on suspension. The group, Jim, what was his name? He was the painter, Jimmy, I don't remember at this time, but then we had numerous guys that were just on the pit crew. They would come by in the evenings and help work on stuff. Ernie Kahn was very a needed person, very talented. He could machine anything. Just had a lot of good help. Jimmy Sepulveda, he was the painter and body guy, did a good job. There were a handful of guys that are still around today. A guy named Ron Cannell. He was, we were from the same neighborhood over in the airport area, and other guys. Enjoyed, had a lot of fun.
I'm Ken Clapp. I've been involved in motorsports since, actually I was about 7 years old, of course, as a fan. Wore a lot of hats in motorsports. Retired as Senior Vice President of NASCAR after 50 years of involvement with NASCAR just a year or so ago. But we're here today to talk about an old and a dear friend of mine, a business partner, a great race car driver, and a pretty doggone nice person by the name of Jack McCoy. We lost Jack a few years back, unfortunately. He was not only a good friend to me and vice versa, but one of the winningest drivers of all time, NASCAR history, on the West Coast. He won more events than any man that ever lived at the highest level of NASCAR on the West Coast. 54 championship level event wins over a period of about 14 years. He also was a contributor to the sport. He wasn't afraid to write a check and put a buck here and a buck there. And he was very, very fair with everybody. Always drove Dodges. I can't remember him, except one occasion. He broke the Dodge at a race up in Kennewick, Washington, and another fellow there that wasn't quite as good as Jack had a Ford, and Jack was in the point standings, and they let Jack drive his Ford, and Jack 32nd in that Ford. But anyway, Jack wore a lot of different hats. One that I was very close to, the West Coast Stock Car Hall of Fame, which was established to recognize those that had gone a yard beyond the norm. Open to drivers, car owners, mechanics, promoters, race officials, really media. We have several media members that have been inducted into it. But Jack and I got ourselves into a situation nearly 20 years ago where the Hall of Fame was in a bad state. He and I had both been inducted into it, in fact, at the same function, the same night down in Los Angeles, along with a lot of our old friends, but it needed to be reorganized and run like a business. And we took the bull by the horns. Both of us put some money into an account and got it on its feet. And today it's, maybe I'm a bit biased, but it's the most desired Hall of Fame west of the Mississippi River in automobile racing. And we're also extremely philanthropic, having given over $500,000 to charity in the last couple of years. But Jack and I also, kind of a funny story, he called me one day and he said, he always called me Kenny, And he said, Kenny, he says, Jack, he said, you want to invest in a farm just out of Modesto? And I said, tell me more. He said, well, it's about 25 acres, it's out on Crow's Landing, and it's a good deal. We can buy it and build a racetrack on it. This is about 35 years ago. And I said, how much do they want for it? He said, only a couple $100,000. I said, yeah, let me run down there and take a peek and let's have lunch and talk about it. So we did. And we met at the Sportsman Club and shook hands and made a deal. And we acquired this land. And shortly thereafter, he called me one day and he said, can you come to Modesto? I said, sure. And back in those days, I lived in Rio Del Mar over on Monterey Bay, and the NASCAR West Coast headquarters, which I was responsible for to run it and so on, was in Scotts Valley, California. Because we weren't a walk-in service type of office, we were a working office. Well, anyway, I went over to Modesto, and he said, we're going to meet some dairy farmers. I said, okay, great. He said, well, not too great. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, they don't feel like their cows are going to be very happy with race cars. I said, and these fellas are all friends of yours. He said, well, you even know a couple of them. So we met at the Sportsman Club, and if I'm not mistaken, Jack was the only race car driver that was inducted into the Sportsman Club's Hall of Fame. That may still be the case, I don't know for sure. But anyway, so we sat down with these gentlemen, and they said, well, we are happy you acquired this land that you did. You'll be great neighbors, we know that. Jack's told us all about you, and you know a couple of our fellow ranchers here. But guys, we don't want race cars near our cows. And I thought, well, we've got a pretty good sized piece of land out there on a fairly main road, and one of these days there'll be a lot of homes built on it, and we'll do a lot better than we would have done building and owning a racetrack. So no worries. And so I looked at Jack and I said, well, how do you feel? He said, well, you're hearing it, and We need the cooperation of these fellow neighbors. And I said, well, I think we're out of the racetrack business and we're in the friendly cattle business. Well, everybody laughed and we all shook hands and wished each other well and went on our way. Well, about a year later, a little less than a year, Jack calls one day. Well, we talked on the phone all the time, but he calls one day. He says, Kenny, we got an offer on our land. I said, can we get out of it what we put into it? He says, well, it's a Chinese investment group and they won't negotiate, but they offered us a firm $600,000. He said, I think $400,000 return in a little less than 12 months is pretty good. I said, yep, take it. No questions asked. So anyway, Jack and I had several other adventures of that, that type of thing together, but never had an argument, never disagreed, great relationship. But let's go to Jack's abilities as a race car driver and his history a little bit. Jack came out of Bakersfield, California originally. His family came up to Modesto and they were in the tire business, McCoy tires. Like everything Jack ever did, he was successful. And as the years went by, he became even stronger in business, but he also became extremely strong at the highest level of NASCAR on the West Coast, which was originally the old Pacific Coast Grand National Series starting in the 1950s and went on to be known as NASCAR Winston West. And anyway, the name got changed a few times because of sponsors of the series. And Jack started competing in that series. In fact, I was at the very first race he ever drove at that level. Because prior to that, he had been a dynamic, iconic participant at a track I happen to still own in Stockton, California. And he was almost unbeatable at one time. He was just plain good. But he crashed in another event down at Clovis, California, pretty early in his career. And he didn't lose any body parts, but he had very little control over his right arm. I believe it was his right arm. Anyway, yeah, because his handshake was very weak. And if you didn't know why, you would think he just didn't know how to shake hands. But there was nothing he could do about it. I mean, it was the way it was. And he almost lost it. So he got into the NASCAR Pacific Coast Grand National with his partners Ernie Kahn and Charlie, I can't remember his last name right now. But anyway, almost instantly he was good. He had a good car, but they knew what they were doing. They knew how to set a car up. And Jack understood the cars really well. And he understood tire pressures. And that was a very important part of the whole package. The very first race he was in was at Ascot Park down in Gardena, California. I was there, and nobody paid much attention to him. It was, he was new on the circuit, but I knew him, and he finished fifth. And he went on through the rest of the 1964 season, and he had a lot of top 5 finishes. He did not win a race that year. In 1966, Charlie Bell was the other partner, and Ernie Kahn and Jack acquired a brand new Dodge Charger, and they won races. They won the NASCAR Pacific Coast Grand National Championship with that car in '66. Jack won 54 races in his career, 2 championships. He came back and won again in 1963, and then more or less retired shortly after that. For a lot of reasons. Racing was going through a transition at that time, and there was a lot of young guys coming into it. Jack was financially quite comfortable, and I don't think his wife Peggy, who is a very close friend of all of us, I don't think she put a lot of pressure on him to retire, but he did. And he was getting up there in his years, but he had some real accomplishments and some downfalls as well. He crashed terribly bad at Daytona, and the first time he ever went there, he took a very fast Studebaker. I'm going to say this was in the early 60s, and he flipped it 14 times at about 185, 190 miles an hour. Didn't get hurt. Speaks to how safe NASCAR makes the cars be even then. And he had a fiery crash in the Riverside 500 along about 70, 71, right in there. Because after they acquired that Dodge Charger in '66, he started getting a little bit of factory help. By that, I mean, Dodge division of Chrysler Corporation was friendly to him with parts and equipment, and I don't know if they ever gave him money or not, but the team was never short on money. They always had adequate funds to run with the very best. But anyway, our friendship continued, and we still did a few business deals together every once in a while, and I miss him. He's such a good friend. He was a good mentor to younger guys. He didn't go out of his way to help younger guys, but he did it without even realizing he was doing it. Very, very early in my career as a promoter, and this is going back nearly 60 years ago, I promoted a big event at Altamont Speedway, and it was a bad day. The weather was very marginal. It had rained the night before. The night before, a young driver by the name of Dick Atkins, who was from Hayward, California, got killed at Ascot in a sprint car. And that hit all the TV and newspapers and media deliveries in Northern California. Dick Atkins was a terrific, nice young man on his way to go to the Indianapolis 500. He drove for J.C. Agajanian. He was extremely popular. And the next day we had our big stock car race at Altamont. And I never thought when I first started promoting races about losing money. I wasn't doing it to make money. I had a job, a good job. But I just wanted to see the sport go forward, and that was really my whole DNA. And when the race was over, and it was a sparse crowd, I remember in Victory Circle, Jack won, and he looked at me and he said, "I think I did better than you did today." And I said, "Yeah, you did." And he whispered to me, "Do you have the money to pay the purse?" And I said, "No, I don't. I'm going to have to tell all the guys it's going to take a couple of weeks to get it together." So we had a meeting. The sparse crowd that was there was completely gone. Nobody left around. Well, a couple of the guys I'd known ever since I was a teenager, because I'd been on a pit crew and eventually a crew chief and a car owner and so on. But a lot of the guys were newer guys, and they started, scowling at me and making remarks to me, and Jack said, "Whoa, guys, don't worry about your money. You're gonna get it. I've known this guy for a long time, believe me. He doesn't have the money to pay you today. He didn't anticipate the kind of whipping we were gonna take today crowd-wise, because we only had 800 people in the grandstand, and we expected 5,000. So anyway, in 2 weeks I had everybody paid, and looking back on it, all it did was help me with my career, because it gave me respect. But I don't know, that day if Jack had to spoke up like he did, there might have been a good old country brawl. I don't know. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about Jack, but those are the highlights in my memories. I'd like to close by saying I love the guy, and it was an honor to be a buddy with him, and his wife and I are still pals. I never hang up talking to her. I don't say I love you, and vice versa, and our families are friends. There's my Jack.
Well, I'm Dick Haggerty, and I guess you could say that Jack McCoy and I were pretty good friends. Jack and I go back to 1967. When I first moved to Modesto, I had been a race fan for as long as I can remember, and I used to watch Jack race at Stockton Speedway and the modifieds, and of course he was hugely successful at that. More successful probably than anybody in history. The summer I lived in Stockton near the Speedway, he won about 25 races, and we saw most of them. Moved to Modesto, and one of the things I wanted to do was meet Jack, because I had admired him. I'd also seen him race in the what we called the late models at that time, which was the ultimate circuit on the West Coast. And I saw Jack win that first race. He won it in a Dodge Charger, a '66 Charger, which Dodge acknowledged was the first race ever won by a Dodge Charger. Won it at Stockton Speedway. And so I got to meet Jack. He was racing at the Crow's Landing Trans Am Sedan race, 1967. I was a member of the junior chamber. In fact, I was the business manager for the race, and Jack raced in that event. Didn't do very well. Raced an old Mustang that somebody from Seattle had loaned to him. After the race, I met him at the race, and I said, "Can I come talk to you at your shop?" He said, "Sure." So he told me where the shop was, and I stopped by and introduced myself to Jack, to Charlie Bell, Darnie Kahn, to all the good old guys. And I said, "What do you want to do? What are you good at?" And I said, "Well, I can sweep the floor. I'm not much of a mechanic." Then they found out I was a CPA, and they said, "How about if you take care of the business side of our race?" And I said, "That's easy." So for the next 4 or 5 years, I was, I suppose you'd say, the business manager of Jack's racing team. I kept the books, I kept the accounting, I filed the tax returns. I worked with sponsors and worked with the different people, racing officials and all. At some point, to sort of augment this, NASCAR hired me to be the West Coast PR guy for the circuit, and I did that for a year alongside of helping Jack. I traveled with him all up and down the coast, and I actually drove the big bus that hauled the race car. I worked in the pits, ran errands, did whatever I needed to do, kept the sponsors happy, kept NASCAR happy. At some point, Jack said, "I'd like to race again at Stockton," and there was no promoter to do that. He said, "Starling, how about promoting the race?" So I said, "I've never promoted a race before, but let's give it a try." So I promoted the race, ended up promoting 7 of them, 7 races at Stockton over a course of the years. I think Jack won 5 of them. We didn't do real well financially every time. We broke even a couple of times, made a few bucks a couple of times, and the last race we ran there, he won, and I couldn't afford to pay him $1,000 he won, which was, I guess, okay. He never held it against me, but his crew chief didn't like it very well. I also was involved with Jack in his business as a CPA, a young CPA in town. I volunteered to do some accounting work, and ended up being 1 day a week, every week, 1 day a week, because I was his controller, and I worked at the tire shop for a couple of years. I worked every Friday at the tire shop, and so I got to know Jack as a businessman. I would say if Jack had not been obsessed with racing, he would have been one of the most successful business guys I ever knew. He was very focused. He was focused in his racing, he was focused in his business. Whatever Jack got into, he focused on. Problem was that when he focused on one thing, some other things didn't get focused so well, but that's another part of the story. So I was involved with his business, I was involved with the racing team. Eventually we decided to buy a couple of airplanes, and so Jack and I owned a 172 and a 210, and we did some flying. We did quite a bit of flying later when I raced the Baja, which Jack helped me with on the racing side. I can remember a lot of racing stories. The most important thing I can say about Jack was that he was an amazing short track driver. Jack could see a hole between 2 cars that was about 5 feet in size, and he's driving a 20-foot race car, and he could fit in that 5-foot hull. Jack was uncanny at making his way through traffic on short tracks. It was always fun to pull up to the track with the big hauler, and we'd start to unload, and everybody would congregate around because, hey, the big guys are here. McCoy is here. It's time to go racing. Of course, our number one competitor at the time was Ray Elder from down in Carruthers, the racing farmers, and ironically, Ray, who he won more championships than Jack. Jack won more racers than Ray. And Ray had bought his first race car was that '66 Charger that Jack won with at Stockton. And Ray actually beat us more times than I like to think about with that old Charger. But it was fun going out and bumping noses with somebody with your old car, and we had a lot of fun. It got real serious at times. Like I remember some serious moments after a few on-track events that were kind of exciting. A few times some rocks got thrown and a few other nasty things, but all in all, we just had a great time. Jack had a couple of really bad accidents, one at the very beginning of his career when he was racing down at Clovis on a modified, and somehow the throttle stuck and he went straight into the end of the crash wall on a half-mile track, and the seat belts had not been put in properly. I know why, but I don't want to tell on Jack. And seat belts broke loose, and Jack went up and hit that rearview mirror with the right side of his face, and it crushed his face. It also crushed his right arm. Jack never had much strength in that right arm. People didn't know it, but Jack used to drive one-handed with his left hand. If you ever ate dinner or lunch with Jack, you saw him eat in a very difficult manner because he had no strength at all in that right hand, and that was crushed really in the first year or two that he was racing. Later on at the end, the last race Jack ever ran was down in Baja after I had retired. In fact, I was supposed to be racing that last race with him. And it was an unfortunate situation, and he was driving a little mini pickup, and it got tangled up with a dune buggy who was stopped in the road, and Jack went end over end, and of course his co-pilot, which should have been me, his co-pilot Stanley, was killed in that crash. Jack was hurt really bad, and they airlifted him to San Diego from down in San Felipe, and it was touch and go for a while. He finally got back home, and it seemed to change him a little, but in the end Jack bounced back and was the same old Jack, but he never had any desire, I guess, to go back racing again, and that was kind of the end of it. It's kind of the bookends, if you will, of his career. A crash at the beginning that disabled him, but it didn't stop him. And a crash at the end that could have killed him, killed his co-pilot, but Jack got up and got going again. The last Baja 1972, which was actually right at the end of Jack's time racing with the late models. And my partner Chuck Billings and I took second in the Baja 1000, the pickup class, 1972, and Jack was there. He came down and helped us work on the race and helped support us. He pitted for us, he flew to La Paz, he met us down there. Jack was very supportive of what we were doing racing. He helped us with our tires and everything. Some years later, after I kind of tapered, I raced them continuously for another 10, 12 years, and at the end, there was a couple of races I raced with Jack. Jack and I drove together in the pickup. I'll never forget the race we had on the Baja 1000. We were going up through the mountains and through the forest, and we're flying along pretty good. And we came around a corner, and I had owned my own race truck previously, which I had sold. And we came around a corner, and then Jack had helped me sell it to another stock car guy. We came sliding around the corner, Jack driving, and here was my truck upside down in the middle of the road, wheels still turning around. That was kind of funny, but another 10 miles down the road, and Jack said, "Sterling, I think we're on fire." So we stopped real quick and jumped out, and sure enough, the battery was in the back of the bed of the truck, and the battery was smoking pretty good. So I grabbed some sand and threw it in the battery and put out the fire. Then we had an interesting time putting the whole thing back together. I thought we were done, but Jack said, no, if it'll start, we're going to keep going. So we got it started, and we drove on to San Felipe and eventually finished the race. It was a pretty tough situation. The last race that Jack ran was the hard one. It was a race with the pickup. It was a race, there were 4 of us involved in putting it together, and I had committed to going to Haiti on a medical mission, and also I'm on the Salvation Army National Board. I'd committed to going back to New York for a board meeting, which happened to coincide with this race. And so I told Jack I can't go. And Jack said, Sterling, we're all ready to go. The entry fee is paid, just take the airplane, because we'd used my plane to support racing in the past. And he said, fees paid, it's all taken care of, you just come down and you run with me. So I don't run so good unless I got you, we're a good team. I said, Jack, I can't do it. And so I argued with him. Every day he called me and said, Sterling, I know you can change your mind. I said, Jack, I'm not going to change my mind. The day of the race was the day before I was supposed to go back east. They were racing in Mexico, and I was at home trying to get myself in order so I could go back east. This is kind of an emotional story. And I was out working on my pasture, getting it ready, and my wife came running out to the fence, and she said, was the race today? And I said, yeah. And she said, what, did Jack race today? I said, yeah. She said, were you supposed to be in the race? I said, yeah, but you know, I've got other commitments. And I said, well, they've called, she said. And I said, just my luck, they probably won the race. And she said, no, they didn't win the race, there was a crash. She said, did Stanley go in your place? So I said, yeah, Stanley's works for Jack, he's a great guy. She said, Stanley's dead. It was a tough moment to absorb that when you realize that the guy sitting in your seat is lying somewhere down in Mexico dead, and you're still at home. Jack was hurt pretty bad in that crash, and I helicoptered him up to San Diego. He spent about a month in the hospital down there, maybe 3 weeks, and we got him home, and he was pretty subdued for a while. I think it hurt him not only physically, but it hurt him to lose Stanley, who'd been a faithful employee and a really good guy. He was a friend for all of us, and it was just a painful experience, but I was also blessed to know that I'd stuck with my guns and did the right thing. Jack commented later, he said, Sterling, I don't want to make you feel guilty, but if you'd been with me, we probably wouldn't have crashed. And I said, well, I've thought that all along, Jack. One of the things I did with Jack when he drove is sometimes he got a little heavy-footed, and I would calm him down a little. Sometimes I'd see something ahead because I had 12 years of experience and could say, you know, kind of keep an eye on this situation, or kind of watch this, or something's coming up. And there's no doubt in my mind, if I'd been with Jack, that it wouldn't have had that crash. We might have had another one, I don't know. But that was kind of the end of Jack's racing career. After that, I don't think he had the inclination. I know Peggy wouldn't have not have wanted him to race after that situation. So, it's a sobering end, a great career. And Jack was the greatest. He was the best. Last 6, 7 weeks of his life, I spent a lot of time with Jack. I didn't know he was sick. He had an opportunity to take his old 1936 Plymouth down to Ontario, to Fontana, to the Fontana racetrack. The NASCAR race was there, and they asked some of the old timers to bring their old time cars and do a parade lap before the race on TV. And so Jack asked me to go with him, and we went down. We spent the whole weekend down there, just the two of us, at the NASCAR race, and Jack did, in fact, he and I got in the old Plymouth and we drove around the track, made it our appearance on TV, and it was pretty fun. We spent some really nice time together, and got to watch the race, and I drove us home afterwards and dropped him off, and a month later he was gone. It was pretty shocking, but the joy of having spent really quality time with Jack in the last month.
About Jack McCoy, what he did helped me in my life. I was a construction superintendent. I decided I'd had ulcers a couple times and find something to do to get away from the 16, 18-hour a day business I was in. I looked at scuba diving, snorkeling. The water was too cold. Tried flying. I was too impatient to be a good pilot. So I tried racing. Started out in the Sunbeam Tiger, switched over to a Formula car after the first year, and that's where I learned how to set up chassis and things. And I won a number of Formula car races, won 2 championships. I wanted to go bigger racing. I was thinking Can-Am or Formula 5000. I need to make more money out of it. So I started my own business. I was a general contractor. I did primarily framing and multi-unit projects. That was my background. I moved to Modesto to do a job here. I met, through Chuck Jones, I met Jack McCoy. And I was around Jack for a couple of years. I used to go over on weekends and help work on his race car. And we got to talk about racing a lot. And I thought, really, stock cars look interesting. I don't want to drive one of those big cars. One weekend we were up in Canada running a road course up there. And he said, why don't you take a couple laps in it? Oh, wow. So I got in a stock car, 3,500 pound stock car. I used to drive a Formula car, was 820 pounds. I made a very slow lap, and I went down the back straightaway the second lap, and the Sonny Easley was coming up on me. Man, I wasn't going to let him get by me. I ripped on down the straightaway, went to hit the brakes, and this thing wasn't going to stop like the Formula car stopped. Darn near wrecked his car. Made another lap and got out and said, this is a whole different world. And then eventually, a year or so later, I rented a car from him to run a race up in Yakima. And I ran that race. I think I qualified like fourth or fifth, which was really amazing to me because I wasn't that good in stock cars. Ran the race, finished 8th or 10th, something like that, and I was absolutely wiped out. I couldn't have any help to get out of the car. It's a tough job driving these stock cars compared to Formula cars. You're just laying back and shifting a little shifter. And so I got to talking to Jack a lot about cars over the next couple of years. And this is like 73, 74. Jack, at the end of 74, Jack decided to retire. And he knew a little bit about my racing background and had a little bit of faith in me. I guess we get brought up the Cannonball race. Well, I don't know if I'd ever heard the Cannonball. Well, I'd read all about the Cannonball. It was a dream of a lifetime to do something like that. I never thought I'd get the chance. Jack said, I'll make a deal with you. I had been running Baja a little bit, a friend of mine, and I owned the truck. I ended up buying the friend out just to do something, trying to make money to do something bigger. I really didn't want to race Baja all that much, but it was something to do. And so he gave me an opportunity to run the Cannonball, and I would take him on the next Baja race, and that's how I got into Cannonball. Learned a lot about Jack. He is the most competitive guy I've ever run across. Maybe Ivan Baldwin was another one like him, Chuck Millington. There's a number of them out there. But the way they went at racing was all or nothing. And working with Jack, when he retired, he brought up Ivan Baldwin, and they started building race cars, and they had them build me a stock car, a NASCAR stock car. I built me a Chevrolet. It wasn't quite ready for the first race in 1976. Would have been my first really NASCAR race, and so I borrowed Jack's old Dodge. Took us about 4 weeks just to prepare it so we could drive the thing on a racetrack. And my first real NASCAR race, except for a little oval track that we ran up in Yakima, really the car for, was the Riverside Cup race with Eddie Pearson, all those guys in there, Bobby Allison. And I went down there with the Dodge. Jack would qualify middle of the field running with those guys, because he was never a road course racer. I was, so I thought, well, I should do better than this. But no. I really worked. I finally qualified like 28 and ran that race. And back then they ran 500 miles. About 4 hours into it, the rear end broke. And I was so happy it broke because I was wiped out. Lost about 8 or 9 pounds that one race alone. Blisters on my feet from the hot car, on my legs. And all of a sudden, racing became a whole different world in stock cars. So, talking to Jack about stock cars, we'd sit down and talk about tires. I talked about a tire, put it on a car, and you went for it. Talk about people. There is so much to a tire. We could sit down and talk for 3 hours about tires. And he would lay it out, talk about sidewall. The heavier sidewalls, you can't run as low pressure. And too much low pressure, it humps the middle of the tire so you don't get as much rubber on the ground. So the tire thing was amazing with stock cars. We could run a softer sidewall tire up the night down to, get down to 8 pounds one time, spun the tires off the wheel. So we screwed them on, which wasn't legal to do, we put them on the inside of the rim. And we do that to qualify, but you couldn't run a race like that, your tires would be gone in a few laps. So this tire technology, then we talked about shocks, and these hours and hours of conversation about race cars. They told me one time that NASCAR writes the rules, it's up to us to read between the lines, which was interesting. And but as we were going on these trips, Jack had a whole mail hauler. They put the Dodge in, and we'd ride up to the races in Washington, Oregon. And I was had my own business going. I didn't go to college, just out of high school. I went to be a carpenter, then I ran work. And I was running this business and struggling with money collecting. And Jack helped me so much just on my business side on these trips. You got to know him really well, and he had all the answers or most of the answers. If he didn't have the answer, he would give me, hook me up with somebody. First time I ran a NASCAR dirt race, we were set to race at Ascot Park in '76, and he hooked me up with a guy in San Bernardino. I don't remember his name today, but he's a track champion at dirt track racing down there. So we went down to have dinner with him. I ended up spending the night on his couch. We went down on a Friday afternoon, had dinner, bought his dinner. He came over to his house. We talked until after 1 or 2 in the morning. Slept on the couch, got up in the morning, went out and had breakfast. We spent the whole day talking about dirt track racing. And our race was the following weekend, and I qualified third. Almost won the trophy bag. I'd never run a dirt before in my life, and that's a whole different level. And I'd never even realized how different it was. But it's just amazing the things that Jack knew and taught me, made me successful, not only in racing, but in my business. He's just an amazing guy in so many ways.
Okay, we'll talk about Jack McCoy. I don't remember exactly when I met Jack McCoy, but we've been at the Stockton Speedway. I actually started racing where most people don't even know there was a track. Robert would well know that, but that was in Oakdale at the rodeo grounds. Did you know they had racing there? Yeah. In 1954, Oakdale Jalopy Association. And no, it lasted a few months. And then I went to the Modesto 99 Stadium, which was at the south end of 7th Street, where it runs into, you turn right there and it becomes Morgan Road. It's where the county equipment yard is now. That was 99 Stadium. And that is where, I think in Jack's book it has a picture of him going to the wall there. I remember that crash. I didn't know him, but I remember him doing that. And that was sold at the end of the 1956 season, or maybe even during the season, to the county for the county equipment yard, which it still is today. So there's been other efforts, including Jack McCoy and the group, to put another racetrack in Modesto, because Modesto's always been so deep in racing all types, whether it's on 10th Street or at 99 Stadium. In fact, probably I would imagine that there were more racers from Modesto at 99 Stadium than any other single city on it. And it was, of course, started out with a form of, well, it didn't start out then, it started in 1948 as a dirt track for 2 years. But I'm not really sure what the division would be. It was more or less jalopies on pavement. And so I would have met Jack during that time. But we didn't become close friends until, well, it wasn't too long, a year or so later that I spent a lot of time with him. I worked for Pacific Telephone then in the main building on 13th Street, and I would go down to Jack's tire shop during the lunch hour, and we'd
talk one thing or another. And so I got to know Jack very well. And then I worked on Fee's Auto Wreckers on Sierra Road in Oakdale, which at that time was the largest wrecking yard in California, on weekends to support my racing. And I would trade Jack parts that he needed for tires, and that worked out well for both of us. And so, trying to get the logic in order here. We did that, all the time that either one of us raced at Stockton, up to the time that you got where you bought all the parts. Instead, where we built cars at Mellows Ranch, where Robert, all of us formed the crew, we had just across the fence from us, free take of whatever parts we could use out of the big Fee's Auto Wreckers. And so I did a lot of trading with Jack. And then Jack had I didn't know if it would be a temper or just, he talked, let's say he talked a lot sometimes when he shouldn't have been talking. And he got into some physical things that I helped him with a couple times. And we became very close friends, but only in the racing part. Although we were at a couple parties together that was racing induced. And but basically the racing is what our connection was. And we were connected. One night I saw in the Examiner a midget for sale in San Francisco for $500, which midgets at that time didn't have much value to them. I guess something like an Offie would, but this had a Ford 60 in it. So Jack and myself and my wife drove to San Francisco to look at that, but it wasn't something I'd even be interested in. In fact, on the way back at that time, to go to the Bay Area, you had to go through Tracy, right through the middle of Tracy. And so we're coming back, and it's probably 1 o'clock in the morning or something, and he had this new Plymouth Fury. So we're cruising back on the east side of the little town of Stockton, and this car pulls up beside us and wanted to drag, you know. I can't even remember what it was. So Jack was up for that. So he blasted and we took off with that, and it was a pretty good race, but Jack was pulling, you know, all at once we had the red lights behind us, you know. So we pulled over and the cop went up to the guy in front that pulled in front and stopped and wrote him a ticket. They came back to us and said, well, just sit here for a few minutes and let him get out of the way. I've been trying to catch him for a year. And he said, if you come back to Tracy, don't do any more racing over here. And that was it, we didn't get a ticket. So we had some interesting experiences along that line. One night at West Capitol, at the end of a race, I can't remember if it's a regular season program or what, Larry Burton, who was a top star in West Capitol in Sacramento, I was parked right next to Jack, came over and was really getting line ready. In fact, he was going to kick his butt, you know, and so I intervened some, and Jack disappeared. And so we got all loaded up and everything ready to go. We couldn't find him. And when you come into the pits there, they had like big tractor tires laying flat, you know, making the driveway. And we thought he had gone home with his wife or something, you know. So just as we got out the gate, Jack pops out one of those tires and hops in the truck with us. it's where he's been waiting for us. So, but Jack and I were good friends, but only in the racing sense on it. And I had really good relations with him and respected and trusted his friendship just very much as I did the others involved in racing with me. Robert was certainly, I guess, about a junior in high school when he started coming out to the Mellow Ranch where we were building cars and stuff on it. And we ended up with a little band of brothers, about 4 people that were the core of it, being Robert and Ed Bianchi that did all the body work and everything, and David Mello and myself. We had other people that came too off and on, but that was kind of the core of it. And we continued that until in 1966 is when I ran the West Coast with Jack. And but I wasn't into it like he was in the stock car part. And he went on, of course, to do very well. But I went back to Stockton again, and I had raced using a Hudson engine all the time, and they had changed to the V8s somewhere along there that when I came back, and we still ran the Hudson because we had the dual carburetors. You could run multiple carburetors on it, really kind of flat it, maybe any size engine. And Jack came back from the stock cars in, I think, 1967. No, must have been here in 1966. Anyway, he had a super modified type car that he was running at Stockton. Actually, Eddie Bianchi had kind of built it for him. And it was powered by a little Dodge Ram, a 290-inch Hemi. And so when he went back to the stock cars again the next year, I ended up buying the little coupe for him because I had wrecked my car. And they never could get the Hemi to really produce what it should be able to produce. And that was strange because Charlie Bell was an ace on anything to do with the Mopars. And I didn't either, although I think I won either 3 or 4 trophy dashes in a row, but I couldn't stand to hold them off on the long distance of the race. I ended up wrecking that car on the last lap trying to hold on to the lead. And so then Jack continued, of course, went back with the stock cars he'd done so well in and did even better later then. But racing here, you could certainly kind of tie into the 10th Street drags at that time when 10th Street was the heart of Modesto. You know, on weekends, it was just all bumper to bumper from the drive-in on the north end of town to the Plymouth dealer on the south end. And it was just packed with cars from one end to the other. Go up and down, saying, well, in the city finally made both streets not one-way, so they couldn't do that. And that kind of killed it. But anyway, at that point, you found about every type of car there was on 10th Street somewhere, from roadsters to radical customs on it. And of course, we had Gene Winfield from Modesto who went on into design models for one of the major manufacturers of the reproduce. Anyway, the little cars, the model cars on it. And Jack and I never lost contact, but we never had the closeness after that because we didn't race the same divisions and we didn't really do anything socially. And so I last raced at Stockton in 1972, so Jack was of course well into the stock cars then and remained there. But Jack was a good guy, and we always got along very well and helped each other as much as we could. And I never had a single bad word between us that I know of. And I think the only bad word we would have would be lost. We won't like the word lost. I lost the race, you know. But Jack had a lot of influence, I'm sure, on racing in Modesto because Modesto really turned out some really good racers in the later years after we weren't racing there anymore. And today, I guess the track is still closed, so I know it would be, although they did in 2006 or whenever it was they closed it. They did invite all the old guys back to be there that night on it, and Jack was there that night too. But I saw Jack off and on up until he died from the health problem he had unexpectedly to me anyway, and I believe it was 20. And since then I haven't had much to do with racing since 1997. That's the last year I ran the sprints, which was at the San Jose Fairgrounds Speedway, the 410 sprints. And since then, of course, Jack was out into business ventures with the shop company and different things of that nature. So I don't think anyone had more influence on racing than Jack McCoy did here, and probably never will have.